You know the story? I mean, we all know the story, right? A singular patriarch, 12 sons, this massive exodus from Egypt, and then, boom, a sudden sweeping conquest of the Promised Land.
Yeah, it's basically one of the most famous family trees in human history.
Exactly. But what if you were to find out that the dirt, like the actual archaeology, along with ancient cuneiform tablets and Egyptian hieroglyphs, what if they reveal a completely different reality?
A very different reality.
Right. What if that single quote-unquote family actually included, displaced Mediterranean pirates, roaming Mesopotamian nomads, and local Canaanite farmers who just, well, eventually agreed to share a name?
It's wild. It completely shatters the neat, linear family tree we are so used to.
It really does.
The core thesis of the documents we are examining today makes this really bold argument based on decades of accumulated evidence.
Decades of it, yeah.
Right. And it suggests that the story of 12 tribes descending from a single patriarch, whether you call him Jacob or Israel, is actually a late literary and ideological construct.
So it's not a historical record.
Exactly. It's not history. Instead, the evidence points to a much more complex reality. We're talking about multiple, completely unrelated groups who gradually, merge over centuries into what later became the kingdoms of Israel and Judah.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
Because if you grew up hearing the traditional Joshua narrative, you picture walls falling down, right?
Richard?
Yeah. A massive unified army just moving in to conquer a territory.
Wow.
But today's stack of sources, which synthesizes archaeology, Near Eastern texts, and cultural anthropology, it points us toward a really messy, distinctly human merger.
Very messy.
And just as a quick note as we dig into this, know that we are impartially exploring the historical and archaeological evidence presented in these sources.
Right, we aren't taking theological sides here.
Not at all. We are simply looking at the fascinating history hidden beneath the narrative.
So let's start with the dirt.
The best place to start.
Take us to the central highlands of Canaan, around, 1200 BCE, the Iron Age I period. What are archaeologists actually finding? Well, if you were an archaeologist surveying the central highlands during that specific window, so 1200 to 1000 BCE, you wouldn't see destroyed cities.
No rubble.
Nope. If a massive, unified army had swept in to rapidly settle the land, we would expect to see a distinct, widespread layer of destruction in the soil.
Because they're burning cities down.
Exactly. And that would be followed immediately by a totally new, unified type of material culture. But that simply isn't there.
Wow.
Yeah, there is zero evidence of a sudden conquest.
So instead, the sources describe this massive proliferation of tiny, unwalled settlements. Just, hundreds of them slowly popping up over a long period.
Right. And to understand why that happens then, we have to look at the broader geopolitical picture.
Okay.
Around 1200 BCE, the broader ancient Near East experiences the late Bronze Age collapse.
This is a huge deal.
Oh, massive. The major empires of the day, like the Egyptians and the Hittites, are pulling back or collapsing entirely. And this creates a massive power vacuum in the Canaanite region.
So the big bosses are gone.
Essentially, yes. In the absence of those heavy-handed imperial overlords, local Canaanites who are perhaps marginalized or just seeking better economic conditions, they move up.
They head into the hills.
Yeah, into the sparsely populated Central Highlands to carve out a new life.
They are fleeing the collapsing coastal economies. And as they do, they start adopting very specific identity markers.
Yes, very specific ones.
The sources highlight three big ones, which are pig avoidance, the construction of four-room houses, and the use of collar-rim jars.
Right.
But what really struck me is why they chose these specific things. I mean, it's not arbitrary. Take the pig avoidance, for example.
The dietary choice is fascinating when you view it through an anthropological lens. Pigs do not herd well over long nomadic distances.
They're stubborn.
They are. And they require a tremendous amount of water, which, is incredibly scarce in the highlands.
Right, it's dry up there.
Exactly. Furthermore, the coastal Philistines, who were the established, often antagonistic neighbors down in the valleys, they consumed massive amounts of pork.
Oh, interesting.
So choosing not to eat pork wasn't just a random dietary quirk. It was a loud, visible, socioeconomic boundary marker.
Like drawing a line in the sand.
Exactly. It was a way of physically enacting the statement, we are not them.
That is just ancient boundary setting right there.
Yeah.
And then you have the four-room house, which, again, makes total sense when you look at the mechanics of surviving in that terrain.
Form follows function.
Yeah. You aren't building palaces up there. You are building highly utilitarian structures where you keep your valuable livestock on the ground floor, right?
Yes, to protect them from theft and predators.
And also to generate heat for the family living on the upper level.
Absolutely. And the collar rim jars serve a similarly vital, practical purpose.
Tell me about those.
These are massive, thick-necked ceramic vats. You don't use these for travel.
Too heavy, I imagine.
Way too heavy. You use them for the mass storage of water and grain, which is absolutely critical if you are a sedentary group trying to survive in rugged highlands without easy access to major perennial rivers. So these three markers, the diet, the architecture, the pottery, are the organic, slow-forming hallmarks of a new culture emerging from within the land itself.
So rather than an invading army sweeping in to conquer a territory, it's more like a massive, gradual, grassroots cultural rebranding by the locals.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
They're adapting to a harsh new environment and forging a new shared identity in the process. But if that's the reality on the ground, where does the number 12 come from? Like, why 12 tribes?
Well, the 12 tribes framework is a brilliant, much later literary device.
Okay.
In the broader ancient Near East, the number 12 was profoundly symbolic. It represented cosmic completeness and divine order.
Like a perfect set.
Exactly. We see it everywhere. The 12 months of the solar year, the 12 signs of the zodiac, even standard administrative divisions used by various empires.
Oh.
Yeah. So by organizing the national origin story around 12 tribes, later writers were communicating a sense of totality and divine perfection.
It gives this scrappy Highland coalition a sense of profound cosmic legitimacy.
Yes, it elevates them.
But if this wasn't one big family-like, if they didn't actually share a single father, where are these individual groups coming from?
They're coming from all over the place.
Yeah, our sources point out that the origins of these specific tribes are completely all over the map. Take the name Benjamin, for example.
Oh, Benjamin is a great example.
Let's unpack that Babylonian connection, because this is where the traditional map gets completely thrown out the window.
It really does. Cuneiform, which is the wedge-shaped writing system used in ancient Mesopotamia, provides a startling clue here.
Okay.
When scholars translate Old Babylonian and Mari texts dating all the way back to the 19th and 18th centuries BCE, they find repeated mentions of a semi-nomadic group.
Roaming around.
Right, roaming the fringes of the Mesopotamian empires. And this group is called the Binu Yamina.
And Binu Yamina in Akkadian translates literally to sons of the south, right?
That is correct.
Which is the exact linguistic parallel to the Hebrew name Benjamin.
Exactly the same meaning. And furthermore, in these ancient Mesopotamian texts, the Binu Yamina are characterized essentially as bandits.
Really? Bandits?
Yeah, raiders or just rugged pastoralists operating entirely outside of the Canaanite sphere.
Wait, okay, I'm struggling with a timeline here.
Sure.
If those highland settlements we just talked about show up around 1200 BCE, how are we connecting them to Mesopotamian fringe dwellers from the 18th century BCE?
It's a big jump.
That is a 600-year gap. How do we know it's the same people, or at least, like, the same continuous cultural thread?
That is the exact right question to ask. The connection lies in how nomadic groups operate over long periods of time.
Okay, how so?
Nomadic pastoralists can migrate incredibly slowly over centuries. They move across the Fertile Crescent in search of resources, grazing land, or just escaping imperial pressure.
Moving their herds.
Right. And as they move, they fiercely preserve their ethnonym, their group name. So over hundreds of years, descendants of these Mesopotamian outsiders move westward, eventually settling in the central highlands of Canaan.
Where they get absorbed.
Exactly. They get absorbed into this emerging new culture, bringing the name Sons of the South with them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They go from being Mesopotamian nomads to being fully incorporated into the Highland Israelite identity.
It's a massive transformation.
That is wild. But then you look at the tribe of Dan and you have completely different, almost cinematic origin story. Our sources point to literal maritime pirates.
The Sea Peoples connection, yes. It sounds crazy, but we have converging lines of evidence for this. If we look at Egyptian inscriptions at the mortuary temple of Medinet Habu, Ramesses III records battles there.
Battles against who?
Against a massive coalition of maritime raiders and displaced migrants known as the Sea Peoples.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the late Bronze Age collapse we mentioned earlier displaced entire populations around the Aegean and Mediterranean. And one of the specific Sea Peoples groups listed by the Egyptians is the Danai, or Danuna.
Which sounds suspiciously like Dan.
Very suspiciously.
And the biblical text itself treats Dan like a glaring anomaly.
Right. It does. The text provides fascinating, completely unintentional clues. The Danites appear late in the narrative.
They're late to the party.
Right. And they have no established early territorial allotment like the other groups. In fact, the Book of Judges, specifically chapters 17 and 18, describes them wandering.
Just looking for a home.
Yeah, migrating northward to finally violently conquer a new territory to settle in.
And when archaeologists actually dig in that northern territory where Dan supposedly settled, what do they find in the dirt? Because they don't just find standard Highland Canaanite collar rim jars.
No, they don't. They find material culture deeply infused with Asian influences.
Like Greek island stuff.
Exactly. They uncover Mycenaean motifs and cultic objects that look completely out of place for a landlocked Highland pastoralist group.
Right.
But they make perfect logical sense for displaced maritime people from the Mediterranean basin.
That makes so much sense.
The evidence heavily suggests Dan was originally a displaced group of sea peoples who settled on the coast, were pushed inland, and eventually merged with the Highland Israelites.
And if Dan is bringing in this Asian coastal influence in the north, what's happening slightly further inland? Because you look at tribes like Gad and Asher, and the ancient texts there paint yet another entirely different picture.
Yes, with Gad and Asher, we don't have to look to Mesopotamia or the Aegean. We look locally.
It's right in the neighborhood.
Exactly. The Mesha stela, which is also known as the Moabite stone, an inscription from the 9th century BCE, along with much older Egyptian execration texts, they explicitly mention these groups.
And what do they say about them?
They describe Gad and Asher as established, pre-existing local Canaanite tribal entities.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They had their own territories and histories long before the concept of Israel as a unified nation even existed. They were incorporated into the coalition much later.
Okay, I have to pause here because this is staggering. We have the tribe of Dan, who could literally be displaced Aegean sea peoples.
Right.
We have Benjamin, descended from Mesopotamian nomads. And we have Gad and Asher, who were pre-existing local Canaanite farmers.
A total mix.
How do vastly different groups, pirates, Eastern Desert wanderers, and local Highlanders, how do they ever get lumped into the same family tree? Like, how does this coalition actually function?
This raises a really important question about the glue that held them together.
Yeah, what is the glue?
And to find that glue, we actually have to look away from the north and examine the southern part of the region.
Okay.
Because if the north was this eclectic cosmopolitan melting pot, how does Judah, the kingdom in the south that eventually became the religious epicenter of the Western world, how does that fit into the puzzle?
Right, because Judah is where Jerusalem is. It's the eventual home of the temple.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the introduction of a distinctly southern desert element, specifically regarding the origins of their religion.
Oh, this is the good stuff.
We have Egyptian administrative inscriptions dating from the 14th to the 12th centuries BCE that complain about a group of people called the Shasu of Yahu.
And Shasu is the Egyptian term for semi-nomadic pastoralists, right?
Correct. These were tough, desert-dwelling pastoralists living in the southern Transjordan and the Negev region.
So essentially the arid zones of present-day southern Israel and Jordan.
Yes, very harsh environments. And Yahu is widely recognized by scholars as the name of their patron deity.
Which is an early shortened form of the name Yahweh.
It is, and this perfectly aligns with mainstream archaeological scholarship. It even echoes within the oldest poetry of the biblical text itself.
How so?
Well, the oldest poetry frequently places Yahweh's earliest cultic home not in the land of Canaan, but in these deep southern desert regions, places called Midian, Edom, and Seir.
So the deity Yahweh actually originates way down south, entirely separate from the northern highlands.
Entirely separate.
But what about the people of Judah themselves? In this 10th and 9th century BCE window, did they look and live just like the people up north in Israel?
Not at all. The archaeological profile of Judah during that period shows a stark contrast. Yes, the northern kingdom of Israel was densely populated, heavily urbanized, quite wealthy, and culturally very continuous with older Canaanite traditions.
And the south?
Judah, in the south, was the complete opposite. It was sparsely populated, intensely rural, with very little monumental architecture.
So quite poor in comparison.
Very much so. They had distinctly different pottery traditions and maintained much stronger cultural and economic ties to the southern deserts and the Edomite regions.
It's literally like looking at two completely different countries sharing a border.
Because, fundamentally, they were. The archaeological record heavily implies Judah was not originally part of the northern tribal system. They developed on parallel but separate tracks.
So what does this all mean? Let me see if I can put these pieces together for you.
Go for it.
You have the ancestors of Judah, deeply connected to these southern desert traditions, bringing this state god, Yahoo, into the mix. Meanwhile, up north, this incredibly diverse coalition of Israelites historically worshipped the supreme Canaanite god El, which is literally why the nation's name is Israel, not Israyahu.
That is exactly right.
And eventually, over generations of proximity and political shifting, the northern Israelites adopt Yahweh from the south. It's a massive religious syncretism following a cultural merger.
That is the exact mechanism the evidence reveals. Ancient polytheistic and henotheistic cultures frequently merged deities when populations intertwine.
They just combine them.
Basically, the northern Israelites eventually adopted Yahweh as their primary national deity, blending their traditional El worship with the southern Yahoo worship.
But we still have a massive missing link here.
What's that?
We have all these disparate pieces on the board. You've got local Canaanite villagers reinventing themselves. You've got the descendants of Mesopotamian nomads. You've got displaced sea peoples. And you have southern desert tribes.
It's a crowded board.
It really is. So how and why did they ever unite under one historical narrative? Like, how did they convince themselves, and eventually the world, that they were all biological brothers from one patriarch?
Well, to bind a coalition that diverse, you need a unifying origin myth.
A story to bring them together.
Exactly. A shared story that transcends your disparate backgrounds. This is where the narrative of the Exodus from Egypt becomes profoundly important.
The Exodus.
It serves as a mythical foundation story, providing a shared experience of miraculous liberation and divine selection that everyone in the coalition could adopt as their own.
Regardless of where their ancestors actually came from.
Precisely.
But the 12 tribes narrative specifically, like the detailed genealogical tree claiming they all descended from one guy named Jacob, why write it that way? Why map it out so neatly?
To understand the why, we have to look at the political motivations of the scribes writing this down.
Okay, scribes with an agenda.
Very much so. This was written largely during the later monarchic period and the Babylonian exile. Remember that geopolitical reality we discussed. Israel, the northern kingdom, was larger, wealthier, and deeply cosmopolitan.
Right.
Judah, the southern kingdom, was the underdog. It was smaller, poorer, but absolutely ideologically centered on the exclusive worship of Yahweh and the legitimacy of the Davidic monarchy in Jerusalem.
It's a classic high-stakes political rivalry. The wealthy, diverse north versus the smaller, religiously rigid south.
Right. And when the northern kingdom was eventually destroyed by the Assyrian Empire in the late 8th century BCE, a massive influx of northern refugees flooded south into Judah.
Fleeing the destruction.
Exactly. So the Judahite scribes were suddenly faced with a monumental task of statecraft.
Which was what?
How do you integrate these wealthy, culturally distinct northern refugees into your smaller southern kingdom without sparking a civil war?
Oh, so the 12 tribes story is essentially a brilliant piece of ancient political PR.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer brilliance of the scribes becomes apparent. They retroactively compiled and shaped the narrative to make several vital ideological claims.
Like a retroactive constitution.
Precisely. First, that Judah, despite being the historical underdog, was the rightful central heir of the great King David. Second, that all these disparate tribes north and south actually descended from a single ancestor, making them one biological family that should naturally be united under Judah's leadership in Jerusalem.
Wow.
And third, that Yahweh was always the singular God of all Israel right from the very beginning of time.
That is absolutely staggering. So it isn't just a quaint myth. It was an ideological unification myth applied backward in time.
Yes.
To forge a single, unbreakable national identity out of a highly diverse, historically fragile coalition.
Understanding the political pressure these scribes were under explains why the story had to be told this way.
It makes total sense now. It's taking all the incredibly messy, complicated realities of human migration, like how people actually move, survive, and merge,
Right.
and smoothing it all over with a beautifully neat, linear family tree. Which really brings us to the ultimate realization as we wrap up this deep dive.
It does.
The origins of Israel and Judah are historically diverse. They are archaeologically grounded in the gritty reality of the dirt, not mythologically derived from a single man.
It was a complex, centuries-long merger.
Different cultures, different languages, and different religions.
And recognizing this reality doesn't diminish the power of the history. In fact, it actually makes it far more compelling.
Oh, so?
It shows a coalition of vulnerable peoples figuring out how to forge a shared identity over time, learning to live together, merging your sacred deities, sharing your cultural markers like how you build your houses or what you refuse to eat.
Yeah.
That requires far more human effort, compromise, and resilience than simply inheriting an identity by birth.
It's the difference between being handed a mansion and having to build a house from scratch, stone by stone,
Yeah.
with neighbors who don't even speak your language yet. It's an incredible achievement of human statecraft and survival. And it leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over today.
What's that?
If one of the most famous, seemingly monolithic ancient identities in human history was actually a massive, retroactive PR campaign hiding a patchwork of completely unrelated cultures,
Yeah.
what modern national or cultural identities that we take for granted today might actually be hiding a similarly messy, diverse, and brilliant historical spin.
Well, the muddy waters of history are everywhere if you know how to look for them.
They really are. Keep looking, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.